My name's Antoinette Griffin, and today I'm going to talk about the nice but self-centered communicator. How to tell if you might be one, and how to deal with one if you're on the receiving end. Now, no doubt you know people who are brash and self-centered, and with those two negative traits combined, you probably try to minimize your contact with those people, or you begrudgingly accept their behavioral flaws and show them grace, even though it's difficult. But I'm talking about the person in your life who is nice, kind, maybe even selfless in their actions, but for some reason you walk away from your conversations feeling depleted because it was all about them. So maybe you scratch your head and think, it's just my imagination. After all, they're so nice and kind. Or maybe they're in a season in their life where they need a listening ear. And we all have those seasons in our life when we need a listening ear. But what if you're that listening ear season after season and year after year? Let's look at the difference between what is selfish versus what is self-centered. Someone who is selfish lacks consideration for others. They're chiefly just concerned with their own profit or pleasure, versus someone who's self-centered is just preoccupied with themselves and their own personal affairs. So it's very easy for someone to be very generous, very kind, selfless completely in their actions, but self-centered as a communicator. Consider a friend who invites you to lunch. They come, they pick you up, they're nice to the servers, they're fun, they're talkative, they even pick up the tab. Overall niceness. Yet when you leave, you think back to the conversation and you realize there was none. There was no dialogue. Instead, you were the recipient of a monologue. And when they paused long enough to take a breath, perhaps you volunteered some information about yourself, and that was met with a nod or a smile or one statement commenting about it. And then somehow the verbal spotlight swung back on them. According to Dr. Margaret Rutherford, who specializes in personal development and relationships, she says a self-centered person grabs the focus. You're left wondering why you even bothered to talk to them in the first place. Or you absorb a weird kind of shame for sharing, as if your struggles or joys don't matter. Now, it's always easy to point the finger, but how do you recognize when you may unknowingly be a self-centered communicator? When you may be taking advantage of those great listeners, those quiet, reserved people in your life by monopolizing the conversation without even realizing it? Here are some self-reflective questions to consider. Number one, after you've verbally shared and you ask your friend what's going on in their life, do you pause long enough and ask deeper questions to keep the spotlight on them rather than just accepting short answers and turning the spotlight back on you? And number two, when somebody is sharing something, do you remain with that curious mindset to hear more about their story? Or are you constantly looking at ways to talk about a similar experience? This is a conversation trap, and I've got a video right here that talks about that. Beware of this conversation trap. Or number three, when you leave a conversation with someone, do you think back and ask yourself, how much more do I know about them versus how much more do they know about me as a result of our interaction? Now, if you're on the recipient side of this, meaning you are the listener and you're growing weary of this self-centered communicator, here are a couple of things for you to consider. Number one, some extroverts feel uncomfortable with silence. And so therefore, if you don't volunteer information, they're just going to keep talking. They mean well, but they associate silence with the conversations not going well. I used to have the attitude in a conversation that unless they ask something about me, I'm not going to volunteer anything about myself. Well, that wasn't fair to do to the other person because after all, they might feel uncomfortable asking me questions. They might feel like it's too intrusive. And secondly, Whenever your conversation partner does ask you how you're doing, avoid these vague, short answers such as, I'm fine, nothing's new here, because they may not probe into asking deeper questions about yourself, because they may feel like it is intrusive. So make sure and offer up more information about yourself. You see, both parties shoulder the responsibility for successful dialogue. So if you're the person with that natural bent that likes to talk, then be intentional about taking the spotlight, shifting it on them to gently bring that other person out. Maintain that curious mindset of becoming a listening ear for them. And if you're the person who is always that listening ear, you're more quiet and reserved, be more intentional about volunteering some information about yourself so the other person doesn't have to drag it out of you. And if the other person in turn continues to ramble on about themselves, then you may want to ask yourself how much time and energy you want to invest in the relationship. After all, Chip and Dan Heath, the authors of The Power of Moment, state a relationship in which one party is oblivious to the most profound moments in the life of the other is really no relationship at all. If you have enjoyed this video, I hope that you will hit like and I hope you'll subscribe to my channel.